Some wounds don't strike loud. They bruise quietly, day after day, until you stop recognizing the reflection staring back at you. I raised my son with hands that trembled from exhaustion and love. I stayed up through the nights he cried, prayed through the years he struggled, and celebrated every small win he ever had. But somewhere along the line, when success met pride and pride met forgetfulness, he began to act as though I was a shadow, a ghost, someone he once knew but no longer needed. He walked past me in public, ignored my calls, introduced me as just a relative to people who didn't matter. He didn't know I had seen something he thought no one would ever discover, a secret big enough to crack the mask he wore and remind him exactly who I was. In life, the deepest pain rarely comes from strangers. It comes from the ones who once needed your heartbeat to survive. And age doesn't weaken a mother's love, but it certainly exposes who truly values it. And this is She Echoed, a place where the quiet truths we carry finally find their voice. If it touches something in you, don't forget to hit that like button, share, and subscribe. Your truth deserves to be echoed. It began the day I realized my own son had learned to erase me without saying a word. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the sun catches every golden leaf and turns it into a little fire in the wind. I had taken a walk to the cafe near my son's office, clutching a small paper bag filled with the snacks he used to love as a boy. Little pastries, chocolate bars, and a tiny bottle of his favorite juice. It was a silly thing to do, I knew. He was 32 now. But sometimes the small habits of the past feel like the only threads holding the present together. I saw him before he saw me. He was walking out of the building with two men in tailored suits, their polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He looked different, confident, taller than I remembered, carrying an air of someone who had climbed steps I had never seen. My chest swelled with pride, a warmth I had felt countless times over the years, and yet it was shadowed by a pang of worry. Was he too busy? Too important? Too absorbed in his world to notice me? I called his name softly. "Daniel?" No response. I stepped closer, waving. A smile that had once been enough to melt his worries was now just a gesture I offered to thin air. He glanced at me, or at least I thought he glanced, but it was not a look of recognition. It was as if he had seen a stranger, someone entirely irrelevant. And then he moved past me. Not a nod, not a pause, just past me. The air seemed to thicken around me. My throat tightened. My hands gripped the paper bag a little too tightly, crumpling it in my palm. I wanted to say something, to call out again, but the words died somewhere between my heart and my lips. One of his colleagues, a young man with sharp eyes and a curious expression, noticed the tension. "Do you know him?" he asked, his voice polite, but there was an edge of hesitation. My son didn't even hesitate. He smiled, a practiced, polite smile meant to deflect and protect, and said, "No, she's nobody." The words hit me like a cold wind. My heart didn't just break, it faltered, as if the beat itself was questioning its purpose. The little bag of snacks felt heavier in my hands. Every memory, every sleepless night, every sacrifice I had made as a mother seemed to compress into that single moment. I wanted to shout, to tell him how much it hurt, how much it had always hurt when love and pride collided in silence. But something inside me stayed calm, a quiet, almost eerie calm, the kind you feel when you realize the storm has already passed over you
and all that remains is the wreckage? I remembered the nights I had stayed awake, rocking him when he cried, comforting him through fevers, wiping away tears over scraped knees and broken hearts. I remembered the small victories, the first steps, the first words, the first day of school. And now here he was, a man grown, pretending that none of it had mattered. I wanted to follow him. I wanted to reach out and make him see me, not as a burden, not as a stranger, but as the mother who had been there through every triumph and failure. But I knew better. In moments like these, desperation could push someone further away. Instead, I stood there, breathing slowly, counting the seconds until his figure disappeared down the street. The cafe's bell jingled behind me, a reminder of the normal world, of people who might see me, but not see me. I put the paper bag down on the bench beside me. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I simply watched. And then the memory of the little things came flooding back, the tiny victories that no one else noticed. I remembered how he once used to press his face into my shoulder when he was scared of thunderstorms, how he had once clutched my hand tightly during a school performance, whispering, "Don't let go, Mom." That boy was still inside the man I now barely recognized. And somewhere deep down, I knew he wasn't gone. He was just lost. Hours passed before I could move. People came and went, laughing, arguing, rushing about their lives. And yet I was frozen in a strange combination of grief and hope. I thought about what it meant to be ignored by someone you love, someone you raised. Was it punishment? Was it carelessness? Or was it simply the way pride makes people forget where they came from? I thought about calling him that evening, but I didn't. Not yet. There was a part of me that wanted to wait, to see if he would come back, if he would remember. Waiting felt like both a test and a mercy. I wanted him to face the truth, that love is patient, that it observes quietly, even when it is pushed aside. As the sun dipped lower, turning the street into a soft gold, I finally picked up the bag of snacks. I walked slowly back home, my heart heavy, but my resolve steady. Something was about to change. I didn't know how or when, but I felt it deep in my chest. This distance between us was not permanent. And I had a secret he didn't even know I held. A secret that would one day remind him that no matter how far he tried to push me away, I had seen everything. I had remembered everything. And I had the power to hold the truth, the kind of truth that even pride could not erase. I entered my apartment, the golden light of the late afternoon casting long shadows across the floor. The silence welcomed me like an old friend. I sat down, closed my eyes, and let the day settle into memory. That moment, the one where he had pretended I didn't exist, was just the beginning. Because every action, every avoidance, every word left unspoken had a weight. And I was going to hold it carefully, patiently, until the right moment came. And when it did, he would remember exactly who I was. A week later, fate handed me something I was never meant to see. It started as a mundane task, tidying up the guest room after Daniel's brief visit months ago. He had barely stayed 10 minutes, barely enough time to exchange a few words, drop his bag, and vanish again into the whirlwind of his life. I had almost forgotten the forgotten bag until I tripped over it while rearranging the corner of the room. It was just a bag, nothing special. A dull navy canvas backpack, frayed at the edges with a zipper that didn't close properly. But when I picked it up, something inside it shifted my entire world. Inside the bag was a stack of documents, paperwork he probably assumed he had misplaced or perhaps ignored. I didn't mean to pry, truly, I didn't. But as I flipped through the first few pages, my eyes caught something that made my heart stop. His name, printed in bold letters, appeared next to words that should have never been there. Words like default notice and urgent repayment required. I froze. My son drowning in debt? The thought was unbearable, and yet the documents laid it all bare. Bills he hadn't paid, notices he couldn't ignore, letters from banks, collection agencies, legal warnings stacked neatly, yet somehow chaotic. A paper trail of a man teetering on the edge of financial ruin. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the papers like a lifeline. How had this happened? He had always been so confident, so composed. The man who walked past me like I didn't exist, who barely acknowledged my presence during that rushed visit, he wasn't the powerful, untouchable man he pretended to be. He was human, vulnerable, scared. And I, the woman he ignored, the one who treated me as invisible, was now the only person who knew. I sifted through more of the contents, heart pounding. Emails printed out, warnings highlighted in red, legal notices from creditors with deadlines that had already passed. Each sheet seemed like a silent scream, a cry for help that had gone unanswered. It was overwhelming. Every piece of paper seemed to whisper the truth he had tried so hard to hide. My Daniel, my son, the boy who had once clung to me for comfort, the boy whose hand I had held through scraped knees and stormy nights, was struggling, alone and terrified. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me: anger, hurt, sadness, but also a strange sense of empowerment in this discovery. For the first time, I held a truth that he had not anticipated, a secret so intimate, so crucial that it could shift the balance of our relationship. I thought about my next steps carefully. I could expose the truth, confront him gently, offer guidance, remind him that he was not alone, or I could wait, let him stumble through this alone a little longer, and then reveal the secret at the perfect moment, ensuring he recognized the depth of my care and the patience I had maintained despite his neglect. My mind raced with scenarios. What if he reacted with anger, humiliation, shame? What if he felt betrayed by my knowledge? I could sense his pride, his need to appear invincible, and I knew that revealing my awareness too soon could trigger rejection instead of reconciliation. No. Patience, observation, timing. I studied the documents again. They painted a picture of a man teetering on the brink, missed payments, urgent warnings, pending legal action. He was scared, very scared. And he had no one to turn to, not really. His friends, busy with their own lives. His colleagues, too formal, too distant. And yet here I was, the one person he had ignored, now the only one who could truly help him navigate the storm he had hidden so carefully. A mixture of sadness and resolve settled over me. This was more than a secret. It was a chance to reconnect, to guide, to reclaim a part of our relationship that had been lost to pride and avoidance. But I had to do it right. I had to approach it with care, with love, and with a strategy that would pierce through his defenses without shattering his dignity. As night fell, I organized the papers neatly on my desk, making mental notes of what he might need most urgently. I drafted gentle ways to approach the subject, ways to let him know I understood without making him feel exposed or ashamed. For the first time in weeks, a small, cautious hope sparked within me. Daniel may have pretended I didn't exist, may have brushed me aside as if my presence were inconsequential, But here was proof that our bond, the bond of a mother and her son, could not be erased. And one day he would realize it. Because secrets like these, the ones we are never supposed to see, have a way of revealing the truths that matter most. And in that revelation, power shifts, awareness awakens, and hearts long closed begin to open. I folded the papers carefully, tucking them back into the bag. I didn't need to confront him tonight. I didn't need to rush. But I would be ready. I would be patient. And when the time came, he would understand that the woman he had ignored, the one he had pretended didn't exist, had always been the one standing silently behind him, waiting to protect, to guide, and to remind him that love endures even when it seems invisible. I let out a deep breath and sat in silence, knowing that the quiet knowledge I now held was as dangerous as it was powerful. And for the first time, I felt the stirrings of a plan, subtle, careful, unassailable, that would change everything between us. He thought he had nothing left to hide. He was wrong.
Instead of confronting him immediately, I waited. It wasn't easy. Every day felt like walking a tightrope between patience and frustration. I watched him from a distance, studied his routines, and observed how carefully he shielded his vulnerabilities from the world. The pride that had once been a source of his charm, his confidence, his bravado, his sense of invincibility, had become a wall, one I had no intention of breaking through with anger or reproach. Days passed, weeks followed, and each time I saw him, he acted the same way he always did, cold, distant, as if my presence was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. His eyes, once so full of warmth and recognition, now darted past me. His smiles were brief, rehearsed, and devoid of the connection that had once defined us. It was as though he had carefully rehearsed the act of pretending I didn't exist, and he performed it flawlessly. The weight of it was almost unbearable. I missed him, the boy I had raised, the young man who had once sought my comfort without hesitation. And yet I knew that rushing in, confronting him about the documents, or showing that I knew the truth would have backfired. Pride was a fragile, dangerous thing, especially his. So I waited. One evening, the phone rang. The ringtone was simple, unremarkable, but it sent a jolt through my chest. I glanced at the caller ID. Daniel. My heart thumped, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation curling in my stomach. I took a deep breath and answered. "Mom?" His voice cracked on the first word. It was almost unrecognizable, raw, vulnerable, exposed. I need help." I stayed silent, listening. He didn't know I already knew everything. He didn't know that the truth, the secret he had buried under layers of pride and avoidance, had been lying in my drawer for weeks, waiting for me to act. But I let him speak. I let him pour out the fears and lies he thought he had to tell, the stories he had concocted to protect his fragile pride. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer advice immediately. I didn't let my own emotions spill into the conversation. Instead, I held space for him. It was strange, hearing him sound so small, so human. The man who had walked past me as if I were invisible was suddenly a boy again, unsure, scared, desperate for someone to lean on. Each sentence, each pause, each tremor in his voice revealed the weight he had been carrying alone. He spoke about missed payments, threats from creditors, sleepless nights filled with anxiety. He confessed mistakes he had tried to hide, decisions he regretted, and moments when he had felt completely powerless. And through it all, I remained quiet, allowing him to unravel the threads of his carefully constructed life. He expected me to beg for closeness. He expected me to seize the moment of his desperation as an opportunity to force my way back into his life. Perhaps in his mind, the mother he had dismissed, the woman he had pretended didn't exist,
would now grovel for attention, desperate to fill the void he had created between us. But I had learned something over the years. Sometimes silence protects you better than anger. Sometimes allowing someone to reveal themselves on their own terms teaches lessons that words never could. I let the silence speak. It told him I was listening. It told him I understood. It told him that I was not here to punish, to shame, or to scold, only to witness, to hold, to support, if and when he was ready to accept it. The minutes stretched into an hour, and still I said nothing, beyond the occasional gentle murmurs to acknowledge him. He continued to spill the truth, the facade slipping further with every word. I could hear the relief in his voice, the slight tremor of emotions he had buried beneath years of pride. And as I listened, a small, cautious hope began to bloom inside me. This was more than just a confession. It was a turning point. The consequences of his pride, the distance he had maintained, the coldness he had cultivated, were meeting him now in the most human way possible. Vulnerability, fear, humility. And in that intersection, he had no choice but to reach for the one person he had tried to push away. I realized then that sometimes consequences are necessary. They are not punishment, but reflection, a mirror showing what pride, left unchecked, can cost. He was learning that lesson the hard way, but he was learning it nonetheless. Eventually, his voice grew quieter. Exhaustion and emotion had begun to weigh him down. I heard the catch in his breath, the hesitation in his pauses, and I knew he had no more words left. I waited a moment longer before speaking. My voice was soft, steady, deliberate. "Daniel," I said, using his name carefully, deliberately. "I know everything." There was a long pause on the line. He swallowed audibly. "Everything?" His voice was barely above a whisper, tinged with fear, disbelief, and a flicker of shame. "Yes," I replied. "I know about the debts, the letters, the threats. I know everything." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was different this time. This time, it wasn't just his silence filled with anxiety. It was the pause before recognition, before understanding, before the weight of reality settled on him. I didn't want you to know," he admitted finally. I didn't want to burden you. I thought I could handle it alone." "You don't have to," I said gently. "You never did, and you never will." For the first time in months, maybe years, I heard him exhale deeply, not the shallow, hurried breath of someone pretending to be fine, not the clipped exhale of someone avoiding me, but a deep, human sigh, a resurrender, a release, a fragile opening of the heart he had kept closed for so long. And I knew then, without a doubt, that the silent waiting, the patience, the refusal to force closeness or manipulate his vulnerability, it had worked. Sometimes pride meets consequence, not with punishment, but with revelation. And sometimes revelation is enough to begin the healing. When he finished talking, I waited a beat longer than necessary. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I wanted him to feel the weight of his own pride meeting reality. There's a strange power in quiet, in allowing someone to sit in the moment just before revelation. It makes the truth land with more clarity, more understanding. Then I spoke. My voice was soft, steady, and deliberate. "Have you checked your old bag, the one you left here months ago?" For a moment, there was only silence on the line. I could imagine him holding the phone a little tighter, his fingers curling around it as if it were an anchor. His usual composure, the mask he wore so carefully around the world, faltered. He didn't respond right away. The pause was long, heavy, and full of everything he had been trying to keep buried: fear, embarrassment, shame, and maybe even a flicker of relief. I continued, letting my voice carry the calm certainty I had cultivated over years of being ignored, overlooked, and dismissed. "You don't have to pretend with me. Not anymore." The words hung between us. I could almost hear them reverberating in his chest, bouncing off walls of pride he had built so carefully. And then I heard it, a shaky breath, a breath that trembled with a mix of recognition and vulnerability. "Mom," his voice cracked, small and unsteady. "I didn't want you to think I failed." I closed my eyes. It wasn't just the words that struck me. It was the years of distance, the cold shoulders, the dismissals, the moments when he had treated me like I was invisible. All of it softened in that instant, a little bit of the weight lifting, not completely gone, but enough to breathe. "You didn't fail because of the debt," I told him, my tone gentle but unwavering. "You failed when you treated me like a stranger." He stiffened on the other end of the line. His chest must have tightened as he processed the weight of what I had just said, because it was true. The money, the paperwork, the threats, the fear of embarrassment, those were temporary. But pushing me away, pretending I didn't exist, dismissing me with a glance or a nod, that was the real failure, the real consequence of pride unchecked. There was silence again, this one different, softer, less defensive, more fragile. I didn't know how to, he faltered, and then he stopped. I could hear him swallowing like he was trying to gather the words his pride had stolen from him. "You didn't have to," I whispered. "You never did. Not then, not now." A pause. Then, I just didn't want to burden you." The words were honest, raw, stripped of any pretense, and suddenly I realized how heavy the weight had been on him all along. The years of trying to appear strong, the mask he had worn so meticulously, all of it had been to shield himself from embarrassment, from judgment, from a fear that I might see him differently. But here we were, and I did see him, completely, not as a failure, not as a child, not as a man who had mismanaged his life, just as my son, the same boy I had raised, the same young man I had cheered on through every milestone, every hardship, every quiet victory he thought I had noticed. "You know," I said softly, almost to myself, "sometimes we think that pride protects us, but pride can blind us to what matters most." He could almost hear him inhaling sharply on the other end of the line. That simple breath carried so much weight, regret, relief, recognition, and maybe the first seeds of humility he had allowed himself to plant in years. I've been so afraid," he admitted finally. "Afraid of failing, afraid of looking weak, afraid of you seeing me the way I see myself right now." His voice trailed off, broken, fragile, human. "You don't have to be afraid. Not with me. Not ever. I've seen you at your best. I've seen you at your worst, and I've loved you through it all. That hasn't changed. That will never change." Another silence, this one pregnant with possibility. Then he spoke again, his voice steadier, though still soft. I've been so wrong, Mom. I treated you like you weren't here, like I didn't need you. I thought I had to do everything alone. I thought pride meant hiding, pretending, surviving on my own. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't have to. Sometimes letting someone in, even just a little, can make the hardest moments bearable. And for the first time in a long time, I felt it, the fragile thread of connection weaving itself back between us. Not instant, not fixed, but real, present, acknowledged. I didn't lecture him. I didn't scold. I didn't demand apologies. I simply let him feel what he needed to feel, let him hear what he needed to hear, and let the silence in between carry the weight of years lost and the possibility of years regained. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat, he whispered back, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up, for just being here." My chest ached with a mixture of relief and love so deep it almost hurt. I whispered back, "I never gave up, Daniel. Not then, not now, and I never will." The line went quiet for a moment, but it was different this time. Not empty, not strained, but full of understanding, full of possibility. And in that quiet, I realized something profound. He didn't need to pretend anymore. He didn't need to hide. He didn't need to carry the weight alone. And I, the woman he had once ignored, had become the safe place he had been too proud to seek. That night, I sat back in my chair and let the years of tension, distance, and silent pain soften just a little more. There was still miles to go, still bridges to rebuild, still trust to be earned. But in that moment, the first stones were laid. The first cracks appeared in the walls of pride that had kept us apart. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. He came over that night, not with the swagger of the successful man he tried to portray, not with the pride he had wielded like armor for so many years, not even with the casual indifference he had perfected in our interactions. No, he came with the quiet humility of a child who had finally remembered where home was. The door opened, and he stepped inside cautiously, almost as if he feared the space had changed too much, or worse, that I had changed. I saw the tension in his shoulders, the hesitancy in his step. He glanced around the living room, noticing the small things he had overlooked before, the framed photos on the wall, the little trinkets collected over decades, the faint aroma of tea I had left on the table for him. And then he saw me. His eyes softened immediately. Wetness glimmered at the corners, betraying emotions he had kept bottled up behind a fortress of ego and fear. Mom, he began, voice low, cracked, uncertain. He paused, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I thought success meant distancing myself." The words hit me like a gentle hammer, not sharp or cruel, but powerful enough to echo all the unspoken truths between us. I took a slow step toward him, my hand reaching out without thinking. He didn't flinch. He didn't shrink away. He simply let me touch his cheek. "Success," I said softly, letting each word land, "means nothing if you lose the people who loved you before it arrived." For a moment, he just stood there, trembling under my hand, trying to reconcile the pride he had clung to with the realization that love and respect were not negotiable. They weren't debts. They weren't achievements to be earned or repaid. They were gifts, delicate, enduring, and easily broken if ignored. And then he sank to his knees beside the sofa, letting the weight of his guilt and exhaustion settle into the floor beneath him. Tears, unrestrained, streamed down his face. He cried openly, for the first time since he was 11. I remembered that boy, the same boy who had once come to me after a nightmare, trembling and seeking comfort. The same boy who had once confided in me without fear. And now, decades later, That vulnerability returned not as weakness, but as truth. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply let him be. Not to punish him, not to assert dominance, but to free him. Sometimes the act of witnessing is stronger than any lecture or scolding. Sometimes being present, fully present, is the gift people need most. And tonight, that gift was what he had been denied for too long: acknowledgement, acceptance, and the simple reminder that he belonged. After a long moment, he finally whispered, voice small, almost breaking. I was scared. Scared that I wasn't enough, that I had to prove myself, even if it meant pushing you away. You were always enough, I said, brushing back the damp strands of hair from his forehead, even when you pretended otherwise, even when pride blinded you, even when distance felt like protection. He looked up at me then, eyes shining, raw with emotion. I could see the layers of years peeling away, the embarrassment, the fear, the resentment, and the longing that had never left him. I forgot, he admitted, voice shaking. I forgot what mattered. I forgot you mattered most. I took a deep breath, feeling the years of tension, the distance, and the silent hurt begin to melt. Respect isn't a loan you repay, Daniel. You don't earn it back with words or money or success. You show it in every small choice, in every moment you decide to see, to hear, to honor the people who loved you before the world did. He nodded slowly, as if memorizing every word, letting them anchor him in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be anchored in years. The room was quiet, except for his quiet sobs and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Outside, the night pressed softly against the window, indifferent to human drama, yet somehow witnessing it all. He finally raised his head, meeting my eyes with the kind of honesty that only comes after long lessons learned through pride and pain. Mom, I don't deserve you sometimes, he whispered. You deserve love, I said gently. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And you deserve a chance to be honest with yourself and with me. That's where respect begins. The tears slowed, replaced by a quiet relief, a settling of something that had been broken too long. He leaned into me, letting himself be small again, letting the humility of truth wash over him. And I held him, letting him lean into the safe, unwavering presence of a mother who had always loved him, even when he acted like I didn't exist. I realized then that respect, real respect, isn't something measured in gestures, words, or accomplishments. It's a living, breathing understanding that we are seen, that we are acknowledged, and that we are treated with dignity, consistently, unconditionally, without the expectation of repayment. And that night, Daniel learned that. Not as a lesson in shame, but as a lesson in love. I let him stay on the sofa that night. No words, no instructions, just quiet presence. And for once, he didn't hide. He didn't pretend. He simply existed. In that existence, in that silent reconciliation, I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to hope for in years. The beginning of healing, the quiet mending of a bond I feared had been lost forever. And for the first time,
I understood that no matter how long it takes, no matter how many walls pride builds between us, respect and love, when given freely, have the power to rebuild even the most fractured hearts.
I helped him. Not because he was desperate, not because I held his biggest secret, the one he had worked so hard to hide, the one that could have crushed him in an instant if anyone else had known. Not because I wanted control. I helped him because I am his mother. Mothers don't abandon, even when abandoned, even when hurt, even when dismissed, even when treated like a ghost. I watched him sit at the kitchen table that night, head bent low, eyes red, hands trembling over a cup of tea he didn't notice had gone cold. I saw a man who had built walls around himself, a man who had convinced the world he could handle everything alone, a man who had almost convinced himself he didn't need anyone, least of all the mother he had ignored. But he did need me. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. He flinched slightly, not out of fear, but out of the instinctive awkwardness that comes with realizing how far you've drifted from someone who has always loved you. "Daniel," I said softly, letting the weight of my words sink in, "I know everything. The debts, the threats, the sleepless nights. You don't have to hide anymore." He froze, a sharp intake of breath. He had believed his secret was safe. He had worked so hard to keep it tucked away, believing it was a measure of his pride, a shield against shame. But there it was, laid bare in my presence. You know?" His voice cracked, almost inaudible, like the echo of a boy calling for reassurance decades ago. "I know," I replied, pressing a reassuring hand to his. For a long moment, he sat there, staring at me, the tears in his eyes reflecting the flickering light of the kitchen lamp, and then, slowly, the tension began to drain from his shoulders. I don't deserve this," he whispered. "I pushed you away. I pretended you didn't matter. I shook my head gently. "You don't have to say it. You don't get to rewrite the past. You only get to decide what happens next." His gaze dropped to the table. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, the conflict between pride and the desperate longing for the love he had denied himself. And then I said the words that would anchor him for the first time in years. "I'll help you stand again, but you will never erase me from your life again." He looked up at me, a mixture of relief, awe, and humility in his eyes. And this time, he meant it. He nodded through tears, swallowing the lump in his throat, and said quietly, "I promise. I'll never forget again. I don't know how I let it get this far." "You let it get far because you were afraid. Afraid of failure, afraid of being seen, afraid of being human. But human beings make mistakes. The important part is what you do after you're seen, what you do when someone knows your truth." He reached across the table then, tentatively, as if the action itself carried the weight of decades. His hand met mine, and for the first time in years, there was no pretense, no barriers, no guilt-tripping or prideful walls, just a mother and her son, raw, unfiltered, real. "You saved me," he said after a long pause, "even when I didn't deserve it, even when you treated me like a stranger." I shook my head, smiling through my own tears. "I didn't save you, Daniel. I reminded you of who you really are. And you remembered." We sat there in quiet for what felt like hours. Outside, the night hummed softly, indifferent to human drama, yet somehow bearing witness to our reconciliation. I could see the tension in his body finally release. The rigid posture of the man trying to appear invincible melted into the relaxed form of a son, reclaiming his place in his mother's life. And then he asked the question I had been waiting for, though I had not prompted it. "Mom, why didn't you just leave me? After everything?" I let out a soft laugh, the kind that carries both relief and sorrow. Because leaving isn't in a mother's nature, because love isn't conditional, because I knew that somewhere beneath all the pride and fear, the boy who needed me still existed, and that boy deserved to be seen again. He nodded, swallowing hard, finally understanding the depth of the truth. He wasn't just facing his debts or his failures. He was facing the consequences of the distance he had created between us. And now finally, he was ready to make amends, not with words alone, but with actions. "I'll do better," he whispered, voice steadying. "I'll respect you. I'll make sure you never feel invisible again." "You don't have to earn that respect with words," I said gently. "Show it through how you live, how you treat others, and how you choose to include the people who love you in your life. That's how respect works. That's how love works." I could see understanding dawn in his eyes. Not just relief, but the weight of a lesson learned through the humbling truth. He had been desperate, yes, but more than that, he had been blind. Now the veil was lifted. And in that quiet night, with a cup of cold tea between us and the faint hum of life beyond the window, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Our bond was unbreakable, not because I held his secret, but because I had never stopped seeing him. And he had never truly forgotten me, only hid behind walls of fear and pride. He stayed that night, not as a guest, not as a man seeking redemption, but as a son reclaiming the place he had once tried to erase. And I held him, not as a mother demanding obedience, but as a mother who had waited patiently, unwaveringly, for the moment her child would finally see her. That moment had arrived. The days that followed were quiet, but full of subtle changes. Daniel didn't make grand announcements or promises. He simply began to show up. Not as a man trying to prove himself, not as someone hoping to erase the past, but as a son who had finally remembered what mattered most. He started small. Morning calls, checking if I had eaten, asking about the simplest things in my day. I noticed the way he lingered at the door sometimes, as if afraid to overstep, yet unwilling to leave. And I let him. One afternoon, he came over with papers in hand, the ones he had ignored for months, now neatly organized. "Mom," he said softly, "I've spoken to my lenders. I'm fixing this. I want to do it right." I smiled, not because he was solving his problems, but because he had learned the deeper lesson. Success isn't about hiding mistakes or avoiding shame. It's about owning your life and showing respect to those who never gave up on you. He also started helping around the house, not because I asked, but because he wanted to. Cooking dinner, clearing dishes, even helping me organize the garden. Each small gesture became a quiet act of reconciliation, a bridge rebuilt piece by piece. One evening, we sat on the porch sipping tea as the sun dipped below the horizon. He reached for my hand, this time without hesitation, without fear of rejection. "Mom," he said, "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for everything." I shook my head gently. "You don't repay love, Daniel. You live it. You carry it forward." He nodded, understanding, and in that moment, I realized he hadn't just reclaimed his life. He had reclaimed his heart, and more importantly, he had reclaimed mine. From then on, our lives intertwined again, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments that truly matter. The shared laughter over burnt toast, the comfort of a shoulder during a tough day, the simple acknowledgement that we belong to each other. And I knew, in a way that went deeper than words, that no debt, no shame, no wall of pride could ever break the bond we had rebuilt. Not because I had held his secret, but because I had never stopped seeing him. This time, he would never forget me again. And I, finally, could rest knowing that love, patience, and unwavering presence had won. Respect isn't something that comes automatically with success. It isn't measured by how much you earn, the titles you hold, or the image you project to the world.
True respect is earned through honesty, the kind of honesty that allows you to show your real self, flaws and all. It is earned through humility, the courage to admit when you're wrong, when you've hurt someone, when life has humbled you in ways you can't control. And most of all, it is earned through the willingness to reach out, to admit when you need someone, especially the person who has loved you unconditionally, even when you turned away. Love and respect are not debts to be paid. They are bridges we build with trust, patience, and vulnerability. Sometimes it takes losing sight of someone to realize their true value. Sometimes it takes silence and absence to understand the weight of their presence. Never forget, the people who stay when you failed, who see you through your fear and pride, and who never stop caring, they are the ones who deserve your honesty, your humility, and your respect. Because without that, success is empty, and without that, even the closest bonds can become strangers. Respect and love aren't loans you repay with achievements. They are gifts we give, nurtured through truth, vulnerability, and the courage to face ourselves and the ones who never stop believing in us.
Thank you for spending your time with me. If this story touched something in you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your truth deserves to be echoed. This is She Echoed, where every story finds its voice.